What's up everyone? Alex here. I play a ton of JRPGs, and two aspects of it that I really love are the stories it's able to tell mixed with its characters. So it's no surprise then that, by association, I'm also a fan of point-and-click adventure games. Most people call this genre traditional adventure, or to an even more extreme degree, visual novels. But to me, point-and-click adventure games blend visual storytelling with puzzle-solving mechanics. A Space for the Unbound is a modern point-and-click adventure game. But unlike games of the genre, it blends in a healthy dose of drama, a relative ease in its puzzle design, and some light gameplay elements that make its adventure worth taking. Set in Indonesia in the 1990s, A Space for the Unbound casts you as Atma, a high school student who has the power to explore people's minds and assist them with their mental challenges. These can range from a pastry chef frustrated with her chosen cuisine, to traveling into the mind of an old man to obtain a cherry from a long-dead cherry tree. All of these stories are weaved into the moment-to-moment gameplay with the ultimate task of solving the mystery of why the world is seemingly approaching its end. The footage that you're seeing right now is recorded from a docked Steam Deck, and I want to take the time to thank Togi Productions for this game code. The biggest draw of the point-and-click adventure genre, of course, is its story, and the setup for A Space for the Unbound is sure to confuse at first. But what's really great about this game is that it never lets up one bit, with a new mystery to befuddle awaiting you at every chapter. This isn't meant to purposely confuse, but rather to make you question the transpiring events. A Space for the Unbound masterfully blends things that happen in the real world with Atma's power to dive into people's minds, and the fact that he's able to take objects in and out of these worlds not only makes for an interesting mechanic, but an aspect of the game that makes you inherently question how real the world really is. And when things start happening that tear at your understanding of the ensuing events, the more questions pop up still. Observant folks will notice a through line to these events, and the mental health warning that precedes the title screen provides you with something to ponder, perhaps a clue as to what might be happening. But despite the plot's seeming predictability, however, your adventure through A Space for the Unbound will mostly be filled with moments where you're doing the point-and-click adventure thing of gathering items in your inventory to fulfill the various puzzle objectives that you'll encounter, whether it's inside people's minds or while in town. What makes this task less of a pain is that the town you'll be exploring is quite small, giving you quick and easy access to many of its roads, and also allowing players to really get to know the topography and, by extension, its community. It's one of my favorite parts of A Space for the Unbound, its ability to make us into virtual residents, experiencing the culture of Indonesia in the 90s. As someone who lived in Southeast Asia for almost half my life, I marveled at how my experiences as a teenager were similar to Atma's. Both of our cultures often allow for the idea of calling elder folks in our community more familiar honorifics as a sign of close kinship and respect. Another part that I identified with is how adults would often treat the younger generation a bit more harshly, merely to express how much they cared about them. And one other part that I can definitely relate to is that one guy in the game that sold cigarettes to minors. All the things that I just said would either make any Western-born citizen run for the hills or call the local law enforcement. But the things that you'll experience playing A Space for the Unbound, as much as it's laced with fantasy, was our reality in the 90s. And while I feel so closely and intrinsically tied to the culture and the way people express themselves in the game, it'd be interesting to see how people who didn't grow up in the midst of all of this will react to what's happening in the game. It's through this authenticity and the ensuing mystery that made me play through A Space for the Unbound, despite its warnings about depression, anxiety, or suicidal subject matter. And while those things do exist within the framework of the game, the moment-to-moment gameplay is still your typical point-and-click adventure game. Not every one of these moments is linked to the story, however, but they serve to reinforce the seeming monotony of living in the area at the time. Many games do this by having players go through seemingly banal tasks that'll have you running around town and doing menial chores. And before you know it, you'll find that you know exactly where that general store is, where the garbage dump is, or where the school is located. Slowly but surely, you've now become a resident, albeit a temporary one. Which is all to say that the experience of playing through A Space for the Unbound is immersive in a very different way than other higher fidelity titles. The choice of depicting its environs and characters in what seems to be a cross between 8-bit and 16-bit detail isn't lost on me, as it represents a transition point when games took one more step towards realism. The soundtrack, though betraying this transition as it features more realistic instruments, do provide a sense of calm familiarity that further reinforces the idea that the player's life in this town is just as ordinary as the people who've made it, magical powers notwithstanding. In the 8 years that it was developed, it definitely feels like Mojiken had considered every which way the game would present itself to the player, making some really smart choices that, upon closer inspection, definitely reveal much of what it offers. And for all this talk about its point-and-click adventure roots, there's also a ton of small gameplay bits that changes things up. From kicking a ball upwards of about 50 times, in the same vein as avoiding lightning in the Thunder Plains in Final Fantasy X, to inputting quick QTE button presses in what is obviously an homage to Street Fighter II, and you'll find that these small moments add a bit of variety to an otherwise seemingly mundane set of tasks. And there have been plenty of gameplay moments like these that have surprised and worked well, I might add. And keep in mind that when I'm talking about the mundanity of the game, that this is not at all a detriment. Mundanity is the game's way of immersing you into this world, as the seeming monotony somehow tricks our brain into thinking that what we're experiencing is real, because much of what we experience in games is often exciting and there's always something new happening, whereas the banal reinforces the idea that things are just ordinary, and therefore all too familiar. While I'm hesitant to call it entirely wholesome, as you will be subject to some heart-wrenching moments and the occasional bully, A Space for the Unbound is a lot lighter fare than its mental health warnings portray. I love exploring this small Indonesian town from the 90s, not just from the perspective of someone who had similar experiences living in that general part of the world, but also as a game that is so ambitious that it took its creators 8 years to get it right. And despite the long wait, I'm proud to say that A Space for the Unbound accomplishes so much with so little. And if you're ready to take on an adventure with lighter fare and memories that'll stay with you for a very long time, I highly recommend taking this journey on sooner rather than later.